goal is to try to get $1 trillion out of the deficit. And if the deficit is not brought under control, America will go bankrupt. This is a very important thing for people to understand. A country is no different from an individual in that if an individual overspends, an individual can go bankrupt, and so can a country.
Breaking news as DOGE issues a stark economic warning of a potential incoming recession due to America going bankrupt. Now, not only are we going to go over that, we're also going to go over what DOGE has been saying as far as the $5,000 refund or $5,000 dividend or stimulus or whatever it is you guys have been hearing. We're going to go into the actual math to see if they can even give us that much money if they save us $1 trillion or $2 trillion. So we're going to go under the hood and tell you guys exactly what they can and cannot do so far. Now we're going to end this video talking about UnitedHealth and whether or not they're about to go bankrupt, being that they're laying off about 30,000 of their staff. Now, Mitch Vexler, before we begin, sir, any comment on that opening clip?
I fear that DOGE is missing a major component, and I'm thrilled that, yes, they're looking at knocking off a lot of the principal problems, but it's not just the principal, it's really the cost, the carry of that principal. So we'll get into that shortly.
We're going to start by playing one more clip from President Trump so we all are on the same page about what is being said. But before I continue, I just wanted to say this one thing. Happy Friday and good morning.
About this in recent interviews, and that is we don't need a Department of Education. Okay. And what some people are trying to do is stoke fears that, oh my gosh, my kid's not going to get the money for education, or grandma's Social Security and Medicare. This was a big promise of yours on the campaign trail. So I really want to give you both an opportunity to assure the American people you will keep it, money will be allocated for students, but with higher standards. For example, I would assume associated with monies given or
just
vouchers.
So much, and then Elon goes, but look, Social Security won't be touched, other than if there's fraud or something, we're going to find it's going to be strengthened, but won't be touched. Medicare, Medicaid, none of that stuff is going to be touched.
Nothing.
You don't have to. Now,
I wanted to play that clip because understand what he's saying. He's saying these cuts are coming from fraud. If there is no fraud, there is no worries. Remember that. Let's start with this first article from Axis titled, and this was put out about 22 hours ago, Musk says he'd look into DOGE stimulus check. Oh my gosh, we're going to get another stimulus check here? Let's see what they're saying. Elon Musk plans to check with President Trump, who has pretty much given his permission, about a proposal to send Americans a rebate check with money saved through slash and burn DOGE cuts. And again, you guys understand it's the fraud and excess, not the critical money. At least that's what they're saying, and time will tell. Now, why it matters, the proposal is for, and remember this, $5,000 dividend checks, a number that comes from Musk's original goal of saving the government $2 trillion via budget cuts. So I'm going to show you guys the math here in a second and see if we can even squeeze $5,000 out of what's being saved. Now, driving the news, the idea came from James Fishback. Fishback pitched that 79 million of the 132 million U.S. households should be eligible for 20% of DOGE's $2 trillion target, which comes out to $5,000 for each of those households. But when we break this down into taxpayers, this is all going to be extremely different. And I'm not sure how they got 79 out of 132. Again, we'll go over the math here in a second. Now, Musk responded to the proposal on X on Tuesday, saying that he would run it past Trump. And honestly, so far, okay, cool. We wanted to help make DOGE real for millions of Americans. They deserve a portion of the savings DOGE will deliver under President Trump's leadership. And if there is fraud and they were committing crimes and they used my money as a taxpayer to do that, then yes, I mean, who wouldn't want that money back? I could surely use it. Now, how feasible are DOGE's dividend checks really? Now, reading between the lines, DOGE is unlikely to actually hit its $2 trillion goal and faces multiple legal challenges as well as congressional roadblocks. First of all, if we could help them and we could show them, and Mitch, I'm sure you would agree, we could easily get to $2 trillion if it's just fraud we're looking at. $2 trillion is not going to be hard to hit. That's my opinion. Now, Musk himself, unfortunately, because they're not looking at what we're looking at, has backed off, and they're not even in this, Department of Education really yet, has backed off from the number, telling political strategist Mark Penn in an interview broadcast on X that $2 trillion was a best case outcome. And I don't agree with that. And that he thought there was only a good shot at securing half of it. It's hard to imagine Congress approving the kinds of spending cuts it would take to get anywhere close to that. I wanted to show you real quick. Now let's go to the DOGE debt clock and let's start doing some math. So what I'm going to do, you guys, is first of all, let me show you this. Okay, so it's going to be important to remember the number that I'm circling on the right side here, which is the U.S. income taxpayers. To me, those are the people that matter. The people that are actually paying money from their hard-earned wages to keep this fraud going. So we're going to use 112.5 million taxpayers, and we're going to start dividing it into some of this information to see what's really going on. But Mitch, I wanted to hold here for a second and take a look at this. So this part right here, and I'll go over a couple things. Interest on debt. Okay, that's interest on debt. All right, and I'm going to see $1 trillion in interest paid on debt. You don't like that, Mitch. I know that. You were just talking about that earlier, but they're paying $1 trillion on just interest. That's crazy. And then real quick, take a look at this. Total personal debt right here, $25 trillion. That means that per person, $75,000 in debt. That's really bad. But I also want to show you guys this. This is crazy. So when we look at just the U.S. national deficit or debt, so deficit, debt, same thing, it's showing, and this is not counting unfunded liabilities, $323,000 per tax. So if we get $5,000 back, that's a long way from $323,000. But another thing that I found on this is very interesting. When we go all the way to the right and down, look at what we have here. I got to respect them a little bit, Mitch, because look at what they did. U.S., as we've been talking about, Mitch, unfunded liabilities, buddy. It's on a chart. That's cool. So they're saying we have, oh my God. And this is tricky. I'm going to break this down. They're saying that we have 226 trillion in unfunded liabilities. That should sink your heart, a lot of which is Social Security, income, and Medicare. Now, what they did here is they divided that in citizens, not households, and not taxpayers, probably because the number's a nightmare, Mitch. But just if we did citizens, that's $666,000 per citizen in just unfunded liabilities. But when we divide the actual taxpayers into that, okay, just the taxpayers into that, it's $2 million. So if we just look at the number that they're using, which is right here, U.S. income taxpayers into the unfunded liabilities, that means that each taxpayer is responsible for roughly $2 million in unfunded liabilities. So then when we add that $2 million in unfunded liabilities to the U.S. national debt, that means, Mitch, that you and I have been conservative. They're coming up with each taxpayer, not household. We use household. They're using taxpayers. Taxpayers each, not counting county debt, $2.33 million. Let me do the math for you guys on $2 trillion and see how much they could really afford to pay us if they hit that $2 trillion goal. Mitch, I always have to make sure I'm doing trillions. Okay, so one more, right? So one more is a trillion. Okay, so that's $2 trillion. That's a lot of zeros. So let's divide that $2 trillion into the total amount of taxpayers right here, which is the 112,500. So divided by 112,511,069. And the total amount, if they save $2 trillion in fraud, and we divide the taxpayers into that amount, you ready? Okay, equals, boom, look at that, 17,000. I was like, oh my gosh, that's way more than the 5,000. That got me excited, Mitch. So per taxpayer, if they refunded us our own money, okay, that's my money. If they refunded us our own money, that would be $17,776 per taxpayer. But remember, you guys, they're also saying only 20%. So they are now saying that they're going to take 20% of what they save us and give that back to the taxpayer. And they're saying they're going to take the other 20% and pay off the national debt, which is this massively huge number right here. When we multiply this by 20%, so it's times 0.2, if they got to that goal, each taxpayer would not get $5,000. They would actually get lower, unfortunately, sitting at $3,555. Now, remember, they're using like 70 million or 67 million households. I'm using individual taxpayers, but if we look at individual taxpayers who pay money to fraud, right, to function this whole fraud system, that's $3,555. Now, let me show you guys where we're at right now. If we just take the amount of money that they saved so far, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to round up to 118 billion. Let me make sure. I always have to make sure, Mitch, that I'm doing billions and not like millions. Okay, so that's $118 billion right there. When we divide that by the total amount of taxpayers, let's see how much money they saved us so far. Ready? Boom. Not bad. $1,048 per taxpayer. In other words, Mitch, I mean, they're a little bit all over the place. You know, why would we use only 70 million when we have that many taxpayers? Something's happening. They are slashing things. Musk gave the warning about bankruptcy, which is a logical thing that we should have learned when we were born, like an infant, right? As soon as we have cognitive function, when we don't have something, we can't use it. So my first question, Mitch, to you, sir, is the way that the system is set up right now, is it set up in a way where mom and pop in the U.S. household and the U.S. citizen has to go bankrupt before the government goes bankrupt? Can you shed some light on what the hell they're doing?
Unfortunately, there are cases right now, right here today in Texas, where the answer to that question is yes, the households are bankrupt. There's an entire town that is literally bankrupt. And that town owes about $90,000 in school bond debt. The problem is the average house value in that town is $160,000. Well, that means the real value of those houses is 160 minus 90. Or if you bought a new house in that town today, you're not buying it for 160,000. You're buying it for 160,000 plus 90,000. Either way, if you own a $160,000 house in that town, by definition, you are bankrupt. And so the unfortunate part of that answer is yes. And that is happening in smaller communities, but the debt loads are just as great, if not greater, in even bigger communities. So yeah, that is the reality.
Well said, sir. And we have that data, y'all. We're going to have that video released this weekend. We'll get to that here in a minute in our next segment. But second question, Mitch, we've told people, both of us actually independently of each other, have told people that really the fraud is what's holding the entire economy together. We would already be in recession. So if Trump and DOGE really are eliminating the fraud and the fraud is holding everything together, does that mean that we're headed, rapidly towards a recession? And by them removing the fraud, is that something that will allow us to avoid a depression? How's the fraud holding all this together, and what is going to happen next in regard to that fraud and recession?
Let me answer it this way. The fraud that is rampant, and I mean rampant, to the point where the rule of 72 is on steroids due to the cumulative compounding effect, not just of the rule of 72, but of the continued fraud. And until the states and the federal government jointly say, okay, fraud has been committed, including by a lot of the politicians, those who are responsible, be it the executive branch, you have to fess up that it has been committed. If you don't, those who are responsible, you got problems. So the point is that we saw a chart, came up yesterday, that went all the way back to 2006. And it said in those school bonds that they were going to pay those bonds off. It's called a shrinking fund, sinking fund. And they would pay them off. Well, here we are in 2023. And not only did they not pay them off, but if you literally take that chart, so it's going down this way, you literally take the chart and flip it upside down, that's what they've done. Now, just yesterday, another chart shows up from another school district saying we're going to pay these bonds off by 2054. You lied in 2006, and you're lying today, and you're committing fraud, not just on the citizens, but you're also committing bond fraud. So to that point, the memo that Jeff Mashburn sent out to Pam Bondi lays this case out. The document that I believe was delivered to President Trump today, President Trump, please hand that over to Elon Musk, lays this case out. My fear in all of this is that neither the state nor the federal government is paying any attention to the fraud. And if you remove the fraud from the system, you don't have any choice in the matter. It's not an option. You must do that. And as far as the $5,000 coming back to the taxpayers, no, don't do that. It's a wrong thing to do. Sit still, get your hands on the money, understand what the cumulative compounding effect of this debt load, the nonstop production of fraud in the system, which is occurring by the second. That debt clock is only part of the problem. That debt clock doesn't even take into account the frauds at the school districts. When they go and sign up a new HVAC contract today, when they go and they sign a new food contract, when they go and say, well, we're going to build a new school over here, but we're shutting down 7 schools over here. All of this is tantamount to bond fraud. There's no way out of this. We've got the evidence. We're spelling it out. We're stating what it is. I don't believe any government, be it state or federal, as much as I'm thrilled, okay, you may come up with $5,000. Sit still. Figure out what the total cumulative compounding effect is of this bond fraud, both state and federal, and then we deal with the problem. But the idea of handing back more money just because you think it's going to do something in the economy, you're missing the point. And that's my fear of this whole thing. The point is the cumulative compounding effect of the fraud, and it's parabolic. You've got to address the fraud in order to fix this problem. Other than that, don't spend any money.
Well said, sir. And let's start now moving to the next segment of this where we're addressing the fraud. And to your point, obviously the people that are committing fraud, they're about to have some serious problems because now, call it what you want, we're at a stage of our country where everyone is looking for fraudsters. And so I want to play one clip, it's a brief clip about something that President Trump said, and then we're going to move on to the next segment.
I love it. A 20% dividend, so to speak, for the money that we're saving by going after the waste and fraud and abuse and all of the other things that are happening. I think it's a great idea.
How much money do you think?
Could be a lot. I mean, if it's 20%, we'd give back a lot of money to the taxpayer. And also it'd give an incentive for the taxpayer to go out and report things to us where we can save money.
The thing that he said that I liked and I appreciated, I hope it's true, is that it's going to give, what they're doing is going to give American citizens the confidence that if they do report the fraud, and trust me, Mitch and I have been doing that like crazy, that something's going to be done. And I'm using this as a segue to remind you guys that Mitch and Jeff have made a criminal complaint template and a letter template for you guys to complete to start helping us make a difference and end property taxes and things of that nature. So don't forget, you guys, we've done a lot of the heavy lifting. We've removed a lot of obstacles, but you guys got to stay proactive. You got to go to the link in the description or realeestatemindset.org. And there's 2 templates that we need you guys to start looking at and taking seriously. In a couple weeks here, when I get back from California, which I'm going out there to do a Metro Report video with Melody Wright. When I get back, we're going to start going heavy on the seminars. But Mitch, if you can you explain to the viewers, you sent me an email right before we started doing this video on aggravated perjury. Can you go into a little bit on aggravated perjury just quickly? And why should aggravated perjury be important to the American people?
In the state of Texas, aggravated perjury is punishable by 2 to 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. And when a person, i.e. somebody who is a school superintendent, stands up in front of a board and says, well, but we're only raising your interest rates by 0.29%, and not telling the entire story with regard to the fraud that that entity, that school superintendent, has committed when they signed off to go and raise bond money, that is the definition of aggravated perjury. And it's not the only place. Like, they've got bond fraud, they've got problems up the yin-yang. They cannot get away from this. And to that point, I'm literally staring at the chart. And on that chart, it's going like this, okay? So what a chart starts out with is, in this small town I mentioned, with $90,000 in school bond debt per household. That grows at a 7% clip in 30 years to 1.4 million. So when I say this is parabolic, and my fear is that nobody's understanding, it's not the principle. That's the problem here. Yes, when you look at the debt load, it's a problem. But it's not the principle itself. It's the cumulative compounding of the interest, and it doesn't stop because they keep adding more layers of fraud on top of it. So the $5,000, I'd much rather see be used to pay down the principal to help reduce the clock. But that's just me. Point of the matter is, please, federal government and state governments, get your act together. It's the cumulative compounding that you've got to be looking at. Nothing else matters but the median household income and that cumulative compounding. The answer to the bankruptcy and the answer to the fraud is in those two numbers.
Now, speaking on aggravated perjury and school superintendents committing it, that's not all the public servants that are committing fraud. Let's look at a senator that's been in the headlines recently. This article just came out titled, "Trump Attorney Begins Revenge Quest with First Target Chuck Schumer." This is what I like to say. If there's no, they did the same thing to Trump, right? If there's no fraud, there's no worries. Why are they being attacked? I mean, I don't want to be political, so I'm just going to move on now, but I want to read a couple things right here, and then we're going to look at Ryan Riley's post that is going to go over the memo. Now, Washington, D.C.'s interim MAGA U.S. attorney, see how there's MAGA U.S. attorney? So that's why you and I have to even be careful, Mitch. I don't want to divide anyone. I want people to use the math and help us conquer the fraud. It has no Republican or Democrat loyalty. It just wants to kill everyone. Now, the attorney is coming after Chuck Schumer for supposedly leading an attack on Supreme Court justices. I wonder what else they're going to find. In a weirdly aggressive office-wide email Wednesday, U.S. Attorney, and we'll look at this, it's pretty crazy, Ed Martin cast Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency and the greater Trump administration as potential victims of violence, specifically due to the rhetoric of Schumer. Martin then posted that these remarks, which Schumer walked back shortly after he made them 5 years ago, led directly to the alleged attacks at Justice Kavanaugh's home. You guys remember that? These politicians are no joke. And if you guys want to take a look here, here's the memo right here. Basically, this attorney is saying, let them do their job. If there's no fraud, there's no worries. The only worry is if there's fraud. And as I'll read this last paragraph right here from him, let me be clear. They need to capitalize that we. Let me be clear. We will protect each other. And then they do a capital right here, no period. We will protect our judges and cops, and we will go after the people who threaten federal workers and who use their threats to move others against us. We will hold all of them accountable because, as former President Joe Biden said in 2024, no one is above the law. Mitch, before we get into UnitedHealth, and we're going to get into UnitedHealth next, and the 30,000 people that they're slashing, what are your comments and your reaction on corrupt politicians and the fraud that they've been committing potentially for several decades?
I think you just hit the nail on the head inadvertently. Isn't it interesting that those politicians who claim to have knowledge, yet have no knowledge, end up committing fraud, perpetrating the fraud, and continuing to perpetrate the fraud, and then shut down those who have the solution? And how do they shut them down? Well, in the case of Schumer, it's clear he made those comments. He is attempting to foment violence, and that is a state and federal crime. There's no doubt about it. So, yeah, this is happening, but this is also one of the reasons why this fear has perpetrated itself while we can't go up against the system. And that is why we are where we are today, with trillions of dollars in fraud built into a fraudulent system. Until that is recognized and dealt with straight up, wherever it leads, which is what we're doing now, because we understand exactly what this math means. And it's not a pretty picture. When you have an entire community that is literally bankrupt, the whole community, not one house, not two houses, the whole community, this is a problem. And this happened under certain politicians' watch. We're going to get into it. We're going to spell it out. Those people will end up with criminal complaints, and wherever it leads, i.e. through Pam Bondi, the SEC, wherever it's going, too bad. Those people who committed those crimes, you get what's coming your way.
Now let's go into the final segment of this video, and let's take a look at what's going on with UnitedHealth and try to decide whether or not they're going to go bankrupt, being that our entire health system is bankrupting Americans. United Healthcare employees claim the company is offering layoff packages for up to 30,000 workers, despite better than expected profit for 2024. Now, a few things here. United Healthcare has been in the news since Brian Thompson, the CEO, got murdered in New York. Now, a couple things here. Employees at UnitedHealth allege that the company is laying off tens of thousands of workers. A TikTok content creator named Michael seemed to be the one to break the news of UnitedHealth's supposed layoffs. So apparently they haven't even announced it. They're still current employees, I think there's still employees, are announcing it.
Just a little information out there in case some of you don't know. If you work for UnitedHealthcare, United Health Group, however you want to say it, and you're in E&I, especially ops or M&R, you probably aren't going to have a job anymore because they're laying off everyone. Just a quick update. It has now been confirmed that 25,000 people are getting the option to be bought out before United Health Group, United Healthcare, whatever you want to call them, decides to lay off people with no pay, with nothing, and they're not wanting to give their people answers. Follow for more.
That's a pretty powerful statement. She's basically saying that they've offered 30,000 people a buyout, and if they don't take it, United Health is going to fire a whole bunch of people. Now, this is very interesting and causing quite a disruption because, as this article points out, all of this comes following good financial reports from United Health. So typically when a company plans to lay off its employees, it's because they're struggling financially. However, United Health reported that it's doing just the opposite. An Associated Press report from Tom Murphy stated that the company posted a better than expected profit in the final quarter of 2024. My first question to you, Mitch, do you think that what they're doing, it's probably the inflation and the fraud and the CEOs and all these types of things, right? But being that they just reported their revenue exceeding expectations, probably not minus for inflation, right? It's probably not real revenue. But being that they still said an increase in revenue, beat expectations, do you think that they're possibly laying off because of the incoming recession or an incoming depression? Are they preparing for some hard times here?
Yes, there's no doubt about that. The question that's going through my mind is United Healthcare itself under investigation? You have cost of medicine in the United States, which are much greater than the cost of medicine in Canada or Mexico or Australia. And one has to ask, why is that? And when somebody is taking this type of hatchet to the employee base, something doesn't smell right. So could it be that they understand that President Trump is going to be looking into that and they're going to open up the competitive market? They're going to lay down legislation that says, if you want to sell in the United States, you're going to do the following. Could United Health have done something that's inappropriate as far as bill backs, be it the Medicare or Medicaid, whatever the system is, did they gig it? And is this the ramifications of them gigging the system? I think we'll find out shortly.
And so do you think that the solution here, Mitch, is, and also potentially the next thing that happens, a total redo of our health system? Do we need a total redo of it?
I think the answer is the elimination of massive quantities of regulation. And that would include the FDA itself, because if you don't get rid of the regulation, you end up in the problem that you've got where the system is full of fraud. It's corrupt to the bone. Then you end up with the Wall Street types that start buying up all the doc in a box. So they start acquiring them to make them more efficient, yet the service goes down. And if you open up competition, the competition will take care of that. If you open up the ability for people to manufacture the drugs here in the United States that come off the patents or what have you, right? Somebody wants to manufacture brand new drugs, this is the place to do it. This is the place you want to sell, and you want to sell globally. The problem is there's so many mountains of regulation. It's very difficult to answer the question other than to say, with that amount of regulation brings fraud. And that's why these people are now starting to trip all over themselves. It's one of the reasons why even on the insurance, regular property insurance, you've got problems everywhere. You've got problems in California. You've got problems in Florida. People don't want to underwrite it. If you got water anywhere near you, they won't touch it, the insurance companies. You're going to have to set the plate such that the regulations on that plate are fair to everybody. And right now, that doesn't exist.
Another thing that doesn't exist is like, we can't even, for the most part, right? We can't even invest in anything. So if I sell my house and I cash in on that, what am I going to do with the money? Am I going to buy another overpriced house? I mean, they've locked us out of, it seems like the government has literally cut out lower class, middle class, and upper class, cut us all out and said, screw you guys. We already know this racket. We're going to keep this going. And we're going to help our buddies, which are the banks, whoever's leveraging up debt, even non-banks. Am I wrong to feel like this regulation has actually cut us out, the American people, and brought in elites and banks and people like that. Am I wrong to think that, Mitch?
No, because that's a reality. So just this morning, I received a 7-Eleven, okay, on a 5-cat at $11.8 million.
A lot of
I'm
slushies.
sorry, but anybody who buys that, you're ready for a rubber room. You're up and out stupid. And the point of the matter is that that is what pressure has been put on the system. And it simply can't be done. So even if you're going to say, just like this town that I mentioned, where everybody is bankrupt, if you don't understand what's going on at your local school district, you're paying for it. You're going to pay for it the day. If you buy that house today and you're going to wake up tomorrow morning, you're going to find that you're $90,000 upside down immediately. Never mind the compound cumulative effect of having to carry that debt for the next 20 or 30 years because they refuse to pay off the bonds. Remember, I said no bond schedule, no notes to the balance sheet, and no sources and uses. That combination leads to 100% irrefutable fraud. And everybody that buys a house today, if you do not know what's happening, A, on your amortization schedule, and B, how much money does your school district spend on carrying the compound cumulative effect? If you can't answer those two questions, you got a problem. So that is implicit in what is happening both at the federal and the state level. Because even the $5,000 that DOGE is saying may be coming, spit in the ocean. It's not going to move the needle. You want to move the needle? Go and do the workouts on these bonds. Drive them down 70 cents. Start to flip that debt clock. Now you will move the needle for real. But other than that, keeping this system going isn't going to work. It will implode. Every day puts the probability of imploding that much greater. And it's exponential, just as the exponential growth of the debt.
Mitch, I will say before we get the viewers out of here this Friday morning, I appreciate your time. And to the viewers, I know what we're saying is pretty heavy, but it's important to understand what's going on so that we can adapt appropriately and we won't get swept in the wind. And to you guys, to the viewers, I'd like to say, just stay encouraged. If you're depressed or if you have anxiety and you've lost yourself or whatever, like a lot of people have, because we're getting lied to and we're getting run over. It doesn't matter our political affiliation. One thing that I've done to combat those feelings is I gain my confidence and even motivation from my obedience and my goals. And my goals are not society goals. I have my own goals. They're right here. It's a dream house. I need this, this, and that. And I get confidence from adhering to my goals. And maybe you guys, if you're in a bad place right now, set some realistic goals, redefine what a home is, redefine what you want your life to be, which it kind of should be about community. Go outside, right? Fly a kite, play some basketball, play catch with your children. I want you guys to go out this weekend. I want you to play catch with your children. All I'm saying is, remember this, you guys, it's really about mindset. And I hope you guys have a good one. Now, other than that, guys, if you're out there investing in real estate, investing in your life, you guys already know that we wish you luck and we hope you win.